Hello everyone, my name is David Harris and I'm a PhD student at the Victorian College of the Arts here in Melbourne, Australia, and I also lecture at Swinburne University of Technology. Before we get on with the rest of this talk, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which I'm talking from today, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who lived, breathed, worked and created knowledge in Naarm, otherwise known as Melbourne, Australia, for 65,000 years. I pay respects to their elders past, present and future, and I acknowledge that the land was stolen and not ceded. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking to you about the Ludic priority. But what is that? Well, it's a term that I'm working on at the moment through my PhD and my research. And it's based on some experiences I had as a designer and a creator of various immersive works of art. The Ludic priority refers to a predominant phenomenological audience experience, or a practice emphasis based on game-like elements and objectives within the context of immersive works. It has a reference to a hierarchy, and the idea is that the Ludic priority is set above what might be described an artistic intent for the experience of a work being made, which means players prioritize mechanical efficiency over any other experience in an immersive work. This might include a message or experience or less efficient ways of engaging. The Ludic priority often presents through a goal-oriented mode of engagement and is driven by the pursuit and completion of objectives efficiently and in an operational mindset, really focusing on success or fail states and significant linear progress through a series of events. I use the term ludic based on Calwar's ludus, where ludus, on a scale of paideia, which means improvised or unruled games, or play, I should say. Ludus is a strict hierarchy of kind of rules and boundaries, as described here, a group of games since they constantly appeal to a spirit of calculation and contrivance. I'm still working through this definition, and any feedback at the end would be amazing, or any further thoughts would be fantastic as well. I started thinking about this phenomenon of the Ludic priority back in 2023 while I was working on two separate projects. One was Dance of Ribbons and the other was Hour of the Wolf. And I started noticing some interesting behaviors that were occurring between the two different works. And I want to compare those two works and some of those observations from a practice-led research methodology that I have between Dance of Ribbons and Hour of the Wolf. Hour of the Wolf was presented by Malthouse Theatre in October 2023. It had a cast of 13 and 100 members of an audience could go in at any one time. The show ran for about 8 weeks with 3 shows per day, and I was contracted to be their interactive dramaturg, essentially helping them understand audience behaviour, and I was able to design 2 puzzles for the work as well. The show's premise was that there was a town that the audience could explore, and there were members in the town that were essentially stuck in a time loop. However, they couldn't interact with the audience members. So the audience had to explore the town and figure out why the town was stuck in this time loop, what was this curse, and who was Mrs. Wolf. The 2 puzzles of the show were a series of treasure hunts in which audiences would be able to find and discover secret rooms and secret scenes which otherwise they wouldn't be able to get to experience. Not only providing further context for the story they were in, but also to answer the mystery as to why the curse was happening, which otherwise would have been left ambiguous. The treasure hunts were fairly simple. The idea was there were hidden tokens around the set, and that those tokens would trigger audio pieces for story so that audiences could get that further context of the story. But what happened was, once people found out the puzzles were available, many of the people just sought the token and didn't listen to any of the story, essentially attempting to speed run their experience in order to get to the end goal, which was to meet and have this one-on-one scene with Mrs. Wolf. However, we got feedback that people said that meeting Mrs. Wolf didn't make any sense because they didn't understand the story, which is the very reason why we provided the story in the puzzles. So essentially our players were ignoring every story piece we made and were just focused on the objective rather than the journey. As soon as the show was launched, we found a Reddit post immediately, essentially showing audience members how to complete the work, which demonstrates, I think, the desire for people just to understand the objectives in order to get the outcome, rather than what was the intention of these puzzles, which was to provide extra story context and support and provide a little bit of extra interactivity. What happens when people really focused on the objectives and essentially a problem with the design of the puzzles themselves was that in order to scavenge around the set, people prioritized that above the scenes that were running and also the actors performing and the experience of any other audience member there. Indeed, it got so bad that we had to change some of the puzzle locations and change the puzzle itself and redesign and change some of the performances so that people were not as disruptive as before. The priority of mechanics over story, and in this case the artist's hopes for a narrative, became very apparent. I was very concerned, I should say, that this priority would also seep into or be replicated within a Dance of Ribbons LARP, which was to be formed only several weeks later. But what turned out was that Dance of Ribbons didn't experience this same kind of priority within the player base, and indeed it actually seemed the opposite, and I was interested to know why. Dance of Ribbons was performed, as I said, only a few weeks later in November that same year. This work was intended to explore what ritual means in a community and how to explore two different cultures set in low magic fantasy world meeting one another to perform a ritual that had been forgotten in time. When designing the mechanics of Dance of Ribbons, we avoided as much as we could hard and clear outcomes with objectives to mimic ritualistic practice. Instead, all the mechanics that we did design were ambiguous and negotiable, and this meant that audiences were using them for the sake of exploration rather than the sake of destination, which is the complete opposite by happenstance. It wasn't intentional, it was just the way things panned out. Then it was Hour of the Wolf. Another element I think provided deprioritization of this kind of ludic priority is the fact that we were very clear about the intention behind Dance of Ribbons. We were hoping our players would feel, explore, and examine within the LARP the idea of ritual and community. Whereas in Hour of the Wolf, because there were so many audience members and you can't meet all those audience members beforehand, there was the implicit hope that, much like many theatrical events, that the audiences would glean the understanding of the meaning of the work by the experience of it. But because we had workshops, we were able to communicate with our players, and also because our player base was relatively few, only 800 comparatively to the 500 plus of Hour of the Wolf, most of whom also that we had some kind of connection with, we were able to be very clear with this player base and onboard the work that we were exploring, reiterate it, and clarify it whenever there was any questions. The takeaway that I found from exploring the nature of the ludic priority was that clear objectives, whether they be an immersive theatre or LARPs, potentially cause a priority when players know that they can win or lose when there's success or loss states. It seems to hinder the desire for exploration, and players just want to know the most efficient path possible to get to the next outcome or the objective. By making mechanics non-objective based, working clearly with your community, and I think the open nature of LARP, it automatically serves to deprioritize those immersive spaces. And the last thing I'll say is that the ludic priority is not a problem, it's more of a tension, and that can be used to great effect. So other role-playing games have managed this with Wander Home. They clearly state at the very beginning of the book about what the game's intention is, which is non-ludic, or in this case, deprioritizing the ludic. And another game that really uses the ludic priority as a tool for its artistic message is Train by Brenda Romero. And the game utilizes people's desires for efficiency in order to reveal a terrible nature of the game itself. The ludic priority isn't a problem, it's just a phenomenon that we need to be aware of and realize when we're creating and designing spaces with deeper understandings or even potentially artistic outcomes. We just need to manage audience expectation and our own design limitations when dealing with the ludic priority. Thank you for watching.